The night of March 2nd, 1945. Oberleutnant Heinrich Schmitz pulled his Messerschmitt Bf 1-10 night fighter into a climbing turn over the Belgian countryside. His radar operator, Feldwebel Otto Krause, hunched over the flickering Lichtenstein radar scope behind him. They'd been vectored toward what ground control reported as a formation of RAF bombers returning from a strike on Cologne. Standard intercept procedure. Schmitz had done this 43 times before. He'd survived when so many hadn't because he followed the rules. Stay below the bombers. Use the Lichtenstein to close from behind and below. Fire a quick burst into the fuel tanks. Dive away before the escorts react. Simple, proven, deadly. But tonight, something felt wrong. I have no contact. Krause's voice crackled through the intercom. Ground control says they should be right here, but I'm seeing nothing. Schmitz scanned the darkness above. The moon was quarter full, enough light to see silhouettes, if you knew where to look. The cloud layer sat at 4,000 meters. Perfect hunting conditions. His BMW engines hummed smoothly. The aircraft felt solid beneath him. Everything should be working. Then Otto's voice changed. Sharp. Urgent. Contact behind us. Closing fast. 800 meters. Before Schmitz could react, before he could even process that something was hunting him instead of the other way around, the night exploded. 20mm cannon shells ripped through his port engine. The Messerschmitt shuddered violently. Fire erupted from the cowling. Schmitz jammed the stick forward, diving for the cloud layer, his mind screaming a single impossible thought. Nothing should be behind me. Nothing has radar that can track a German night fighter from behind. Nothing can see me in total darkness. He never saw what killed him. Neither did Otto. The second burst from the pursuing P-61 Black Widow severed the Bf 1-10's tail section. The German night fighter tumbled through 3,000 meters of darkness before impacting a Belgian forest. No parachutes emerged. By the time dawn arrived, American intelligence officers were already examining the wreckage, particularly interested in the Lichtenstein radar system that never detected the aircraft that destroyed it. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how German night fighter pilots went from hunters to hunted begins not in 1945, but 2 years earlier, when the Luftwaffe controlled the night skies over Europe with near absolute authority. By the summer of 1943, German night fighter forces had evolved into the most effective aerial defense system in history. The British Royal Air Force was losing bombers at a catastrophic rate. On a single night in March 1943, RAF Bomber Command lost 72 aircraft during a raid on Berlin. 72 four-engine bombers, each with 7 crew members, gone in one night. 504 men dead or captured. The Germans called it a turkey shoot. The foundation of this dominance was the Kammhuber Line, a network of radar-guided night fighter zones stretching from Denmark to Switzerland. Each zone, called a Himmelbett box, contained ground-based radar stations that tracked incoming bombers and vectored night fighters to intercept them. The system worked with mechanical precision. Ground controllers watched RAF formations approaching on Würzburg radar displays. They calculated intercept courses and radioed vectors to waiting night fighters. The fighters climbed to altitude, closed to visual range using their own Lichtenstein airborne radar, and attacked from the bombers' blind spots. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer epitomized the deadly effectiveness of this system. By war's end, he would be credited with 121 confirmed kills, making him the highest-scoring night fighter pilot in history. His tactics were methodical, almost clinical. The Lichtenstein radar in his Messerschmitt Bf 1-10 could detect bombers at ranges up to 4 kilometers. Schnaufer would close to within 300 meters, positioning himself below and behind the target where the bomber's gunners couldn't see him. Then he'd fire a precise burst from his upward-angled cannon, the so-called Schräger Music installation, directly into the bomber's fuel tanks. The British crews often never knew what hit them. Their aircraft simply exploded in mid-air, and Schnaufer was already diving away, hunting for the next target. The German night fighter arm operated with the confidence of absolute technological superiority. Their Lichtenstein radar worked. Their tactics worked. The British had no effective counter. RAF losses mounted so severely that by mid-1943, Bomber Command considered suspending night operations entirely. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, commander of Bomber Command, privately admitted that his force was being bled to death. The Germans were winning the night battle, and everyone knew it. But technological superiority breeds complacency, and complacency creates vulnerabilities that eventually prove fatal. The first hints that something had changed came in sporadic reports during late 1944. German night fighter pilots began describing encounters with aircraft they couldn't identify. Fast twin-engine machines that appeared without warning fired devastating bursts from heavy cannon and disappeared before the German crews could react. The reports were inconsistent, often dismissed as nervous pilots, misidentifying British Mosquito night fighters or American P-38 Lightnings on intruder missions. Oberfeldwebel Wilhelm Jonnen, a veteran with 34 confirmed kills, filed one of the earliest detailed reports in October 1944. His Bf 1-10 had been patrolling over in western Germany when his radar operator detected what appeared to be a large aircraft at medium altitude. Standard procedure indicated this was probably a damaged bomber struggling to reach England, easy prey. Jonnen positioned for the attack, closing from behind and below. His radar operator called ranges: 2,000 meters, 1,500, 1,000. At 800 meters, with Jonnen preparing to fire, the target suddenly reversed course. Not a gentle turn, but a violent, impossibly tight reversal that no four-engine bomber could execute. Before Jonnen could react, something hit his aircraft from behind. The impacts felt like hammer blows. His starboard engine erupted in flames. Oil sprayed across the windscreen. The aircraft rolled inverted. Jonnen fought the controls, managed to stabilize, and dove for the deck. He never saw what attacked him. His radar operator, scanning frantically through the engagement, detected nothing. They limped back to base with 17 cannon, and strikes in the fuselage and wing. 3 of Jonnen's crew of 3 survived only because none of the shells hit critical areas. The after-action report reached Luftwaffe intelligence headquarters in Berlin, where analysts struggled to explain what had happened. The pattern of damage indicated 20mm cannon fire, consistent with British or American weapons. But the tactical execution made no sense. How had an Allied aircraft positioned itself behind a German night fighter without being detected? The Lichtenstein radar should have shown any approaching aircraft. How had the Allied pilot seen Jonnen's Bf 1-10 in total darkness? The British had airborne radar, but their systems were known to be inferior to German technology. The attack profile suggested an aircraft with performance superior to any known Allied night fighter. The analysts filed the report in a growing folder of similar encounters. By December 1944, that folder contained 47 separate incidents. German night fighters ambushed by unidentified aircraft. Attacks from behind without radar warning. Devastating cannon fire from ranges under 500 meters. High survival rate among German crews, suggesting the attacking aircraft wasn't trying to achieve kills, but rather disrupting German operations through intimidation. What Luftwaffe intelligence didn't know. What they couldn't know, because their own rigid operational security prevented information sharing between services, was that Wehrmacht signals intelligence had already identified the threat. Radio intercept stations along the Western Front had been tracking American transmissions referencing P-61 operations since July 1944. The intercepts mentioned something called SCR-720 radar, with detection ranges exceeding 8 kilometers. Signals officers forwarded this intelligence to Luftwaffe Command. The reports disappeared into bureaucratic channels and never reached the night fighter at units facing this new threat. The failure to connect these intelligence pieces would cost German pilots their lives throughout the winter of 1944 and into the spring of 1945. Hauptmann Fritz Radke commanded the 3rd Squadron of Night Fighter Wing 1, based at Vector in northern Germany. By January 1945, his unit had lost 11 aircraft in 6 weeks to unknown causes. Not losses to British bombers' defensive fire, not losses to escort fighters, not losses to mechanical failure. Simply aircraft that went out on patrol and never came back, no radio calls. No distress signals, no wreckage found. Just empty spaces on the flight line and names added to the casualty lists. Radke was a professional officer, a veteran of the Polish and French campaigns who transitioned to night fighters in 1942. He understood losses. War consumed men and machines with mechanical indifference. But these losses felt different, random, unpredictable. His most experienced crews were dying just as frequently as novices fresh from training. That pattern violated everything Radke knew about aerial combat. Experience should matter. Skill should provide advantage. But whatever was killing his pilots seemed to show no preference. Veterans and novices died with equal probability. On the night of January 15th, Radke decided to fly a patrol himself. He needed to understand what his men were facing. His radar operator, Feldwebel Hans Müller, was one of the best in the unit. Müller could track multiple targets simultaneously, maintain contact through violent, evasive maneuvers, distinguish between real contacts and false returns from ground clutter. If anyone could detect this mysterious threat, Müller could. They launched at 2100 hours into a moonless night. Cloud cover sat at 3,000 meters. Perfect conditions for the British bombers that ground control reported approaching from the northwest. Radke climbed to intercept altitude, throttled back to cruising speed, and waited for Müller to acquire a target. Contact, Müller announced. Bearing 340, range 3,500 meters, altitude roughly even with us. Radke turned onto the intercept heading. The Lichtenstein radar couldn't provide altitude information directly, but experienced operators like Müller could estimate it based on signal strength and ground return patterns. Radke trusted Müller's judgment completely. Range decreasing, 3,000 meters, contact maintaining steady course and speed. Looks like a bomber. Standard procedure. The British bombers flew straight and level once they reached their bombing runs, made them predictable targets. Radke closed smoothly, his eyes adjusting to the absolute darkness outside the cockpit. The only illumination came from the instrument panel's dim red lights and the green glow of Müller's radar scope. 2,500 meters, Müller called, still steady. Radke's right hand moved to the weapon selector, setting up the upward-firing Schrager-Musik cannon for the attack. The standard loadout was two 20mm MG-151 cannon mounted at a 70-degree angle behind the cockpit. This arrangement allowed attacking from directly below the target, where British bombers had no defensive armament. Schnaufer had proven this tactic devastatingly effective. 2,000 meters. Contact is... Wait. Müller's voice changed. The confidence vanished, replaced by confusion. The contact just turned toward us. Sharp turn, very tight radius. That's not a bomber. Radke's hand froze on the weapon selector. Every instinct screamed danger. Bombers don't turn toward intercepting fighters. Bombers run, they evade, they jettison bombs and dive for cloud cover. They don't turn toward the threat. Brake right, Müller shouted. Radke jammed the stick right, pulling into a maximum G-turn. The Bf 1-10 groaned under the stress. Radke's vision narrowed as blood drained from his head. He held the turn for 10 seconds, then reversed left, diving for altitude advantage. His eyes scanned the darkness. Nothing. No muzzle flashes, no explosions, no tracer rounds burning through the night. "Where is he?" Radke demanded. "Lost contact in the turn." Müller's voice was tight with stress. "Searching now." 30 seconds passed. Radke held his diving turn, changing heading every few seconds, making himself as unpredictable as possible. Müller's radar swept the sky behind them. Nothing. No contact. Müller finally reported. Whatever it was, It's gone. Radke continued evasive maneuvers for another 3 minutes before leveling out and checking his fuel state. They had enough to remain on patrol for another 40 minutes. He considered returning to base, but rejected the idea. Running from an enemy you couldn't see, couldn't identify, couldn't understand would destroy morale worse than losing aircraft. Resume patrol, Radke ordered. But from now on, you watch behind us as much as ahead. Müller adjusted his radar scanning pattern, alternating between forward search and rearward coverage. The Lichtenstein system wasn't designed for defensive use. Its antenna array pointed forward, giving limited rear coverage. But limited was better than nothing. 20 minutes later, Müller picked up another contact. Same bearing, similar range, steady course. Radke approached more cautiously this time, maintaining higher speed, ready to brake at the first sign of anything unusual. At 2,000 meters, the contact began descending, standard bomber evasion. Radke followed, keeping the range constant. At 1,500 meters, Radke caught a glimpse of the target. Moonlight breaking through a gap in the clouds illuminated something large. 4 engines. The distinctive silhouette of a Lancaster heavy bomber. Real target, not whatever had turned toward them earlier. Radke positioned below and behind the Lancaster, exactly as doctrine prescribed. His finger touched the firing button. At 400 meters, he fired a 3-second burst. The upward-angled cannon sent shells directly into the Lancaster's wing root. Fire erupted immediately. The bomber rolled left, beginning its death dive. Radke broke right, diving away from the kill, standard procedure to avoid debris and secondary explosions. Müller was calling the kill confirmation when his voice suddenly cut off mid-word. Then, contact, behind us, close. Radke didn't think. He pulled into a vertical climb, full throttle, maximum performance. The Bf 1 to 10's engines screamed. The airframe shuddered. At the top of the climb, Radke rolled inverted and pulled through, reversing course completely. The maneuver was called a split S in reverse, a hammerhead turn that used all 3 dimensions of flight to change direction as quickly as physics allowed. As Radke pulled through the top of his climb, inverted and looking up or down, depending on perspective, he saw it. Just for an instant, a dark shape silhouetted against slightly lighter clouds. Twin engines, but not a mosquito. Too big. More angular. The nose looked wrong, too broad, as if something massive protruded forward. Then it was gone, disappearing back into darkness. "Did you track it?" Radke asked urgently. "Negative." Müller's voice shook. "It appeared at less than a kilometre range. I had no warning. It just appeared." Radke levelled out at low altitude and headed for base at maximum continuous speed. They landed 18 minutes later with both pilots' hands still trembling. The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Intelligence officers questioned every detail: the appearance of the unknown aircraft, its speed, its manoeuvring characteristics, the fact that it had approached to within 1 kilometre without Müller's radar detecting it. Radke described the silhouette as best he could. Twin engines definitely, central fuselage, something wrong about the nose. None of the intelligence officers could match his description to any known Allied aircraft. What Radke couldn't know was that he'd just become one of the first German pilots to visually identify a P-61 Black Widow and survive the encounter. The strange nose he'd described was the SCR-720 radar housing. The reason Müller's Lichtenstein never detected the approaching American aircraft was simple physics. The Lichtenstein operated on a different frequency than the SCR-720, and the American radar had vastly superior range. The P-61 crew had been tracking Radke from the moment he'd killed the Lancaster. They'd watched him break away from the kill. They'd followed him through his evasive climb. And they'd broken off the pursuit when he dove for the deck, not because they couldn't follow, but because they'd accomplished their mission. One British bomber lost, but one German night fighter intimidated, disrupted, and forced to abandon its patrol early. That was the real genius of American P-61 operations over Europe in the winter of 1945. The aircraft didn't need to achieve massive kill totals. It needed to make German night fighter pilots afraid. It needed to transform hunters into prey. It needed to prove that the darkness no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. By February 1945, Luftwaffe Night Fighter Command could no longer ignore the pattern. Too many aircraft lost. Too many encounters with unidentified fast twin-engine machines. Too many experienced crews reporting that their radar systems were being outranged by something they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't escape. General Major Joseph Schmid, commanding general of the 1st Fighter Corps responsible for night defense of the Reich, ordered a comprehensive intelligence assessment. The resulting report, completed in late February, made for grim reading. Based on recovered wreckage analysis, signals intelligence, and pilot debriefings, Luftwaffe intelligence concluded that the Americans had deployed a purpose-built night fighter with radar capabilities significantly superior to German systems. The aircraft, identified as the Northrop P-61, carried radar with estimated detection ranges of 8 to 10 kilometers, more than double the Lichtenstein's maximum range. This meant the P-61 could track German night fighters from distances where German radar operators saw nothing but empty sky. The report detailed the aircraft's specifications as best as intelligence could determine. Twin Pratt and Whitney R, 2,800 engines, producing over 2,000 horsepower each. Maximum speed estimated at 580 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling above 10,000 meters. Primary armament of 4 20mm cannon in a ventral turret. Some variants reportedly carried additional machine guns in a dorsal turret, though this was unconfirmed. Range sufficient for extended patrols deep into German-controlled airspace. But the technical specifications, while concerning, weren't what made the report devastating. The tactical assessment was what chilled senior officers who read it. The report concluded that no existing German night fighter could effectively counter the P-61. The Bf 1-10 was too slow. The Junkers Ju-88 lacked the climbing performance to escape if ambushed. The He-219 was too sluggish in maneuvering combat. Even the new jet-powered Me-262, just entering service, had no radar system capable of matching the American aircraft's detection range. The report's conclusion was professionally worded but brutally clear. German night fighter forces had lost their technological advantage. The radar superiority that had enabled the slaughter of RAF bombers in 1943 no longer existed. American aircraft could now see further, track more accurately, and attack from ranges where German defensive systems were useless. Without fundamental changes in tactics, equipment, and operational doctrine, German night fighter losses would continue to mount while effectiveness declined. General Major Schmid forwarded the report to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring with a request for immediate emergency allocation of resources to develop counter-tactics and improved radar systems. Göring's response came back within 48 hours. One sentence: the Luftwaffe will continue current operations. No resources are available for new programs. By March 1945, Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under the combined weight of strategic bombing, fuel shortages, and Soviet advances from the east. The factories that might have produced improved radar systems were being evacuated or destroyed. The research facilities that might have developed countermeasures were being overrun. The training bases that might have taught new tactics to young pilots had no fuel for training flights. The German night fighter force would face the P-61 Black Widow, with outdated equipment, inadequate tactics, and dwindling numbers. The hunters had become the hunted, and the darkness that once protected them now concealed their killers. The psychological transformation of German night fighter crews during the spring of 1945 reveals itself most clearly in the personal diaries and letters that survived the war. These documents, preserved in various archives, show men who'd once hunted with confident precision, now flying every mission as if it might be their last. Lieutenant Karl Heinemann wrote to his wife on March 10, 1945, "We no longer hunt the British bombers, we survive. Every night I climb into the cockpit, knowing that something out there can see me while I remain blind. The radar that once made us invincible now feels like a child's toy." Otto, his radar operator, stares at his scope with the intensity of a man watching for death itself. When he reports a contact, I no longer feel the hunter's excitement, I feel the prey's terror. Last week, Hauptmann Dietrich simply didn't return. No distress call. No wreckage found. He was here, and then he wasn't. This is how we die now. Silently. Invisibly. Erased from the night sky as if we never existed. The letters never reached Heinemann's wife. British forces overran the postal facility where they'd been stored. Heinemann himself died on March 23rd when his Bf 1-10 exploded over Münster. American intelligence officers examining the wreckage found cannon damage consistent with P-61 armament. The kill was credited to Lieutenant Hermann Ernst and his radar operator Edward Kopsel of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron. It was Ernst's fifth confirmed victory, making him and Kopsel the first P-61 crew to achieve ace status. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The tactical problem facing German night fighter pilots wasn't simply that American aircraft had better radar. The problem was systematic and multidimensional, affecting every aspect of night operations. German ground control radar, the Würzburg systems that had formed the backbone of the Kammhuber line, couldn't distinguish between Allied bombers and Allied night fighters. When controllers vectored German interceptors toward what they believed were bomber formations, they had no way of knowing if P-61 Black Widows were already stalking those same bombers. German pilots were being sent into ambushes without anyone realizing the danger. The Lichtenstein radar aboard German night fighters compounded this vulnerability. The system operated on a frequency of approximately 500 MHz with a wavelength of 60 centimeters. Its detection range maxed out at about 4 kilometers under ideal conditions, often less in practical operations. The SCR-720 radar aboard the P-61 operated at 3,300 MHz with a wavelength of 9.1 centimeters. This higher frequency provided much better target resolution and detection range exceeding 10 kilometers. More critically, the different operating frequencies meant the two systems were essentially invisible to each other. A German radar operator looking at his Lichtenstein scope while a P-61 tracked his aircraft from 6 kilometers away would see absolutely nothing. No warning, no indication of danger. Just empty green display and then, suddenly, 20mm cannon shells destroying his aircraft. Oberst Günther Radusch, commander of Night Fighter Wing 2, attempted to develop counter-tactics in mid-March 1945. His approach focused on using German night fighters in pairs. The lead aircraft would pursue bomber contacts while the wingman flew 1 kilometer behind and 500 meters above, searching for pursuing Allied night fighters. The theory was sound. If P-61s attacked the lead aircraft, the wingman might detect the American aircraft on radar and counterattack. The tactic failed catastrophically on its first operational test. On the night of March 18th, two Bf 110s from Night Fighter Wing 2 engaged a formation of B-17 bombers over central Germany. The lead aircraft, flown by Hauptmann Ernst Weber, positioned for attack while his wingman, Oberleutnant Franz Keller, maintained the protective position behind and above. Weber's radar operator acquired the B-17 formation at 3 kilometers. Weber closed to attack range. What neither German crew knew was that two P-61s from the 425th Night Fighter Squadron had been tracking both German aircraft for the past 8 minutes. The P-61 crews had detected the German fighters at 9 kilometers using their SCR-720 radar. They'd watched the Germans close on the bomber formation. They'd calculated intercept courses with the precision of mathematics, not guesswork. When Weber began his attack run on the B-17s, Both P-61s struck simultaneously. The first Black Widow attacked Weber's aircraft from below and behind, the exact position German pilots had used to massacre British bombers 2 years earlier. 4 20mm cannon fired in a sustained burst. Weber's Bf 1-10 disintegrated. The pilot and both crew members died instantly. The second P-61 attacked Keller from the side, approaching in the wingman's radar blind spot. Keller's radar operator never detected the threat. The first indication of danger was cannon shells ripping through the cockpit. Keller survived, managing to bail out with severe burns. His radar operator and gunner perished in the aircraft. When Allied forces captured Keller 2 days later, intelligence officers questioned him extensively about the engagement. His description of events helped. American analysts understand just how completely the P-61's radar advantage had neutralized German night fighter tactics. The attempt to use paired aircraft for mutual protection was abandoned after losing 8 night fighters in 5 nights. The tactic didn't fail because German pilots executed it poorly. It failed because the fundamental assumption was wrong. The tactic assumed German and American aircraft had roughly comparable radar capabilities. They didn't. The Germans were bringing 19th century weapons to a 20th century fight. By late March 1945, some German night fighter units simply stopped flying offensive patrols. Commanders reported aircraft unserviceable due to maintenance issues. Pilots reported illness. Radar operators claimed equipment malfunctions. None of it was true. The aircraft were functional. The crews were healthy. The equipment worked. But morale had collapsed. Young pilots who'd been taught they were elite warriors, equipped with the most sophisticated technology in the world, had learned a terrible truth. They were obsolete. Their aircraft were obsolete. Their tactics were obsolete. And continuing to fly meant dying for no tactical gain whatsoever. Oberst Hajo Hermann, one of the Luftwaffe's most innovative tactical thinkers, proposed a radical solution in early April. If German night fighters couldn't match American radar technology, stop trying. Instead, abandon radar entirely and use simple visual tactics. His concept, called wild sow or wild boar, had actually been used earlier in the war with some success. Single-engine day fighters would patrol over cities being bombed by the RAF. The massive fires below would illuminate British bombers from beneath, making them visible to German pilots who could attack using visual references. Hermann proposed adapting this concept to counter P-61s. German fighters would patrol at low altitude over known bomber approach routes. When Allied bombers passed, overhead, creating silhouettes against the lighter sky, German fighters would climb to attack. The P-61s, scanning for targets at medium and high altitude, might miss German fighters hugging the ground below radar coverage. The tactic was implemented on April 7th. 12 Fokker-Wulf Fur-2 190 fighters from Fighter Wing, 300 launched from Rhine Airfield to patrol bomber routes into the Ruhr industrial region. The pilots were experienced, the aircraft were capable, and the tactical concept was theoretically sound. None of the 12 aircraft returned. American P-61s from the 422nd and 425th night fighter squadrons had adapted their patrol patterns weeks earlier. They weren't just scanning at bomber altitudes anymore. They were systematically covering all altitude bands from ground level to 10,000 meters. When the German foe 190s climbed to attack bomber formations, P-61 radar operators detected the climbing of fighters from ranges exceeding 6 kilometers. The Black Widows dove to attack before the German pilots even acquired visual contact with their intended targets. The massacre of Fighter Wing 300's Wild Sow unit represented the final collapse of organized German night fighter resistance. After April 7th, no Luftwaffe commander would order massed night fighter operations against Allied bomber streams. The risk was too high, the losses were too severe. The tactical gain was zero. Individual crews continued flying, of course. The war wasn't over yet. German night fighters still scrambled when Allied bombers approached. but the missions had changed from offensive to survival. Pilots weren't trying to kill bombers anymore. They were trying to not be killed by whatever was hunting them in the darkness. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, the Luftwaffe's leading night fighter ace with 121 confirmed kills, wrote in his personal log on April 15th, "The night sky belongs to the Americans now. Their radar sees everything. Our Lichtenstein is as useful as a candle in a hurricane. Last week I attempted to intercept what ground control reported as a B-24 formation. My radar operator acquired the contact at 2,800 meters. Standard approach. But before I could close to firing range, tracers appeared from directly behind my aircraft. I dove to the deck immediately. My radar operator saw nothing on his scope, no warning, no contact. Just suddenly we were being fired upon by something that could see us while we remained blind. I am alive because the American pilot's gunnery was poor, or perhaps because he chose to let me live. I don't know which possibility is more humiliating." Schnaufer survived the war. Many of his contemporaries didn't. Between January and May 1945, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 470 night fighters to all causes. American P-61 units operating over Europe were credited with 82 confirmed kills during this period, though the actual number was almost certainly higher. Many German aircraft that simply disappeared during this time, listed as missing in action with no determined cause, were probably P-61 victims. The kills went uncredited because the aircraft crashed in areas where wreckage couldn't be recovered, or because the destruction occurred over water, where confirmation was impossible. But the statistical impact of P-61 operations exceeded the raw kill numbers. The mere presence of radar-equipped American night fighters forced the Luftwaffe to abandon effective night operations entirely. German bomber raids against Allied positions, once common during 1944, virtually ceased by March 1945. The Luftwaffe's ability to harass Allied supply lines at night disappeared. German ground forces lost the cover of darkness for troop movements and logistics operations because American night fighters were hunting anything that moved after sunset. The broader strategic impact becomes clear when examining Allied bomber loss rates. In 1943, RAF Bomber Command lost 5.4% of aircraft dispatched on night missions over Germany, one bomber lost for every 18.5 sorties flown. By the first quarter of 1945, that loss rate had dropped to 1.3%, one bomber lost for every 77 sorties. The dramatic decline resulted from multiple factors, including improved electronic countermeasures, better escort tactics, and degradation of German radar networks. But the collapse of German night fighter effectiveness played a critical role. German night fighter pilots who'd been shooting down British bombers at will during 1943 were dead, captured, or too psychologically shattered to fly effectively by 1945. The survivors weren't being defeated in fair fights. They were being ambushed by aircraft they couldn't see, couldn't track, couldn't escape. Their technological advantage had been reversed so completely that continuing to fly was essentially suicide. The final recorded combat between a German night fighter and a P-61 occurred on the night of May 2nd, 1945. Oberleutnant Hans-Georg Schierholz, flying a Ju-88 from Night Fighter Wing 6, intercepted what he believed was a damaged B-17 limping home alone. Schierholz was a veteran with 19 confirmed kills. His radar operator, Feldwebel Paul Zobel, was equally experienced. They'd survived 3 years of night combat through skill, luck, and caution. Zobel acquired the contact at 3,200 meters. Unusual range, suggesting the target was large and flying slowly. Schierholz closed cautiously, maintaining higher speed than normal, ready to brake if anything felt wrong. At 1,500 meters, Zobel reported the contact was descending, standard, damaged bomber behavior. At 1,000 meters, Schierholz thought he glimpsed the target through broken clouds. 4 engines, definitely a bomber. At 700 meters, Zobel's voice changed. That's not a bomber. The radar return is wrong. Too compact. Too. The rest of his sentence was lost in the sound of cannon fire, The B-17 wasn't a B-17. It was a P-61 Black Widow deliberately flying slow, mimicking a damaged bomber's profile, baiting German night fighters into exactly the kind of approach Schierholtz had just executed. The American radar operator had been tracking the German aircraft from the moment it began the intercept. The American pilot had deliberately maintained the deception, waiting for the German fighter to close to optimal firing range. Schierholtz's Ju-88 took 17 hits from 20mm cannon shells. The port engine exploded. Fire spread along the wing. Schierholtz ordered his crew to bail out. Zobel and the gunner, Unteroffizier Helmut Franz, escaped successfully. Schierholtz struggled with the burning aircraft, trying to maintain control long enough for his crew to jump. He succeeded. They survived. He didn't. His body was found in the wreckage 3 days later. The P-61 crew, Lieutenant Paul Smith and radar operator Lieutenant Robert Tierney of the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, filed an after-action report describing the engagement as textbook. They'd detected the German fighter at 8,500 meters. They'd monitored its approach. They'd waited until optimal firing range. They'd destroyed the target with a single burst. The entire engagement, from initial detection to kill confirmation, lasted 11 minutes. The German crew had been unaware they were being hunted until the moment cannon shells struck their aircraft. 6 days later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. The P-61 night fighter squadrons stood down from combat operations. Their final tally showed 127 confirmed kills against Axis aircraft, with an additional 18 Vone flying bombs destroyed. But those numbers, like most statistics, tell an incomplete story. The real impact of the P-61 wasn't measured in aircraft destroyed. It was measured in missions disrupted, operations cancelled, psychological damage inflicted. German night fighter pilots who'd once ruled the darkness with absolute confidence died confused and terrified, unable to understand how the technological advantage they'd relied upon had been so completely reversed. The hunters became the hunted, and the darkness that once protected them became the medium through which invisible death approached. The interrogation reports of captured German night fighter pilots from the final months of the war reveal a consistent pattern. Almost all expressed shock at American radar capabilities. Many initially refused to believe that Allied aircraft possessed detection systems superior to German technology. Some insisted they'd been shot down by lucky accidents, not systematic technological superiority. The cognitive dissonance was profound. These men had been trained to believe in German technical supremacy. They'd been told their equipment was the finest in the world. Discovering that belief was false, in the worst possible circumstances, destroyed not just their confidence but their entire understanding of the war they were fighting. Oberst Werner Streib, one of the Luftwaffe's earliest and most successful night fighter pilots with 66 confirmed kills, was captured by American forces in May 1945. During interrogation, he was shown photographs of a P-61 Black Widow and its SCR-720 radar system. His response was recorded by the interrogating officer. "This is the machine that killed us? This is what we were fighting? Why were we never told? Why didn't our intelligence warn us? We flew night after night, dying in darkness, and nobody told us we were already obsolete." The interrogator noted that Streib's hands were shaking as he examined the photographs. Not from fear, from rage. The rage of a professional soldier who'd been sent to fight with inadequate information and obsolete equipment, while his commanders either didn't know or didn't care about the disparity. The technical comparison between German and American night fighter radar systems became clear only after the war, when Allied intelligence teams examined captured Lichtenstein equipment in detail. The German system was elegant in design, reasonably effective for its intended purpose, and represented excellent engineering given the technological constraints of 1941 when it was developed. But it was 4 years obsolete by 1945. The Americans hadn't just improved on German concepts. They'd fundamentally leapfrogged an entire generation of radar technology. The SCR-720 radar aboard the P-61 used cavity magnetron technology that Germany never successfully developed for airborne applications. This allowed higher frequencies, better resolution, and vastly superior range compared to German systems. The American radar could distinguish between individual aircraft in tight formations. It could track multiple targets simultaneously. It could maintain contact through violent evasive maneuvers that would cause German radar to lose lock. More critically, the SCR-720 was integrated into a complete fire control system. The radar didn't just detect targets. It calculated intercept courses, provided steering guidance to the pilot, and in later variants even controlled gun aiming. German systems required radar operators to manually plot intercepts, call steering corrections, estimate range and closure rates, all while watching a single small scope in a dark, cramped, vibrating aircraft. The workload difference was enormous. American P-61 crews completed intercepts in minutes that would take German crews 10 or 15 minutes to execute. That speed advantage meant American aircraft could engage multiple targets per mission, while German fighters struggled to successfully attack even one bomber. The tactical multiplication effect was devastating. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey examined the impact of American night fighter operations on the German war effort. The report concluded that P-61 operations over Europe during 1945, while relatively limited in scale, had strategic impact far exceeding the direct combat results. The collapse of German night fighter effectiveness allowed Allied bomber operations to continue without the devastating loss rates that had characterized 1943. This enabled the systematic destruction of German industrial capacity, transportation networks, and fuel production facilities that made continued German resistance impossible. The report specifically noted that German fighter production actually increased during early 1945, despite intensive Allied bombing. German factories were still producing Bf 110s and Ju 88s in substantial numbers right up until Soviet forces overran the production facilities. But producing aircraft didn't matter when the crews flying them were psychologically defeated. By April 1945, German night fighter units were reporting aircraft availability rates above 70%, but sortie rates had collapsed to less than 30% of January levels. The aircraft were available. The pilots refused to fly them. One particularly telling statistic. During March 1945, German night fighter forces flew approximately 1,100 sorties against Allied bomber raids. They claimed 93 bomber kills, though Allied records confirm only 47 actual losses. During that same month, German night fighters lost 98 aircraft to all causes. For the first time in the war, German night fighters were being destroyed faster than they were destroying Allied bombers. The exchange ratio had inverted completely. The psychological reports filed by Luftwaffe medical officers during this period describe epidemic levels of combat fatigue among night fighter crews. Pilots exhibited symptoms including insomnia, anxiety attacks, inability to concentrate, and in several cases complete psychological breakdown requiring hospitalization. These were veteran combat pilots, men who'd survived years of aerial warfare, suddenly developing stress disorders because the fundamental nature of their mission had changed from hunting to being hunted. Dr. Ernst Hoffmann, Chief Medical Officer for the 1st Fighter Corps, wrote in his April 19, 1945 report, "The men are not cowards, they are not malingerers. They are professionals who've been placed in an impossible situation. They fly outdated aircraft with inadequate equipment against an enemy they cannot see, cannot track, and cannot escape. Continuing to order them into combat under these conditions is not maintaining military discipline. It is murder." Hoffmann's report was classified and suppressed. It was discovered in German archives decades after the war ended. The final chapter of this story belongs not to the pilots who died or the aircraft that were destroyed, but to the lessons that survived. The German experience facing American night fighters in 1945 became required study material for both American and Soviet air forces during the Cold War. The tactical principles were clear. Technological superiority in sensors creates decisive advantage in beyond visual range combat. An aircraft that can detect and track enemies before being detected itself holds overwhelming initiative. No amount of pilot skill can compensate for fundamental sensor inferiority. These lessons shaped fighter aircraft development for the next 50 years. The American 4 Phantom, 14 Tomcat, and 15 Eagle were all designed around radar systems that could detect and track targets at ranges exceeding visual identification distance. Soviet designers developed the Mi-G25 and Mi-G31, with massive radar systems optimized for long-range detection. Modern fighter combat doctrine assumes that whoever sees first, shoots first, and wins. That assumption originated in the night skies over Germany in 1945, when P-61 Black Widows systematically destroyed German night fighters that never knew they were being hunted until the moment they died. The German pilots who survived this experience rarely spoke about it publicly. The shame of defeat, the humiliation of technological obsolescence, the memory of friends who died confused and terrified in darkness. These weren't subjects veterans wanted to discuss. But in private correspondence and unpublished memoirs, the consistent theme emerges. They weren't defeated by better pilots or braver men. They were defeated by radar systems they couldn't match and tactical advantages they couldn't counter. Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, the Luftwaffe's top-scoring night fighter ace, died in a road accident in France in 1950. He was 35 years old. In his effects, investigators found a journal he'd kept during the final months of the war. One entry from April 1945 read, "We were taught that German technology was superior. We believed it absolutely. Our radar, our aircraft, our tactics, everything was the best in the world. The British couldn't match us. The Americans couldn't match us. This belief sustained us through years of brutal combat. Now I know it was a lie. Not a lie told maliciously, but a lie born of ignorance and arrogance. Our commanders didn't know how far behind we'd fallen. Or perhaps they knew and couldn't admit it. Either way, the result was the same. We died in darkness, hunted by machines we couldn't comprehend, fighting a war that was already lost. The Americans didn't just have better radar. They had radar we didn't even know was possible. That's the difference between victory and defeat. Not courage. Not skill. Knowledge. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.